Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Farm Country Update. We hope you're having a great start to your week here on a Monday after a busy weekend. We know a lot of folks are dealing with all kinds of weather concerns, from blizzards and snow to summer heat returning in some places in the Southern Plains to some of those severe thunderstorms that we've had. So spring is definitely here and has arrived, which makes that also means that planting is around the corner. That April 15th go window for the Midwest is just a few days away. So here to talk about some of that, we've got a great panel discussion. And we will be discussing some of our insights from some of the test plots that we've had through the years here at Farm Journal. I'm today's host. I'm Clinton Griffiths with Ag Day Television and Farm Journal Magazine. And I've got a couple of great panelists here that you'll see on the screen. We have Ferrie and Missy Bauer. They've worked with us for a long time and handle a lot of our test plot work here at Farm Journal. And so we're excited to find out some of the insights that they've discovered through the years and some of the things that they've learned from the plot work that we've done and the research that they've done. And we've got a whole host of partners that help make that possible for us each and every year. And of course, we're going to thank them along the way. And you'll see some of the great pictures and work from the sites and the equipment that we use to help get this done every year. But that's one of the things that makes this work unique, is that we do take the time with our partners, Ken and Missy here, to really go out and do some investigative work into, what really matters whenever we're doing our planting and growing season here. And Ken, Missy, I'll let you both kick it off here. But I want to start with one quick question. And before we get too far along, we do have a Q&A box at the bottom. So if you have questions, please feel free to go in there, ask your question. We'll try to answer them as we go rather than wait till the very end. So we'd like to make this a little more interactive as far as conversations go. But one question, Missy, Ken, how far away are you from planting getting started in your area? Missy, you're in Michigan. I'll let you start.
Well, a few weeks ago, we thought we were close, but no, we've got a lot of rain last week, a lot of rain forecasted for this week. So we went from feeling like our soil conditions were pretty good to feeling like we're pretty wet. So for us, some of the early soybean planting, I would say we're at least another 10 days away at best case scenario, maybe a little later than that. And then corn, of course, we'll wait till our soils get warm enough. So the longer term forecast looks like that's going to push us toward the end of April, probably, if not into May. Seems like for us, corn is usually in May anymore anyways.
Yeah, Ken, what about for you?
Yeah, I would say the last rains that we've had to kind of put the brakes to things. There would have been beans probably going in here by the end of the week if we wouldn't have picked up last week's rain. There is rain in the forecast for this week, but there are still some dry areas that didn't get the higher amounts of rain. So I think, yeah, you could see some soybeans going in here in the state of Illinois by the end of the week in those areas, but probably the following week before a bigger chunk would get started. Corn won't go in until this thing warms up a little bit more.
All right. Yeah, it's so variable, it seems like, around the country, depending on where you are and what pocket of weather that you're in. Not a big widespread start to the planting season so far. And, for a lot of those northern acres, we're talking another blizzard. They've got 2 feet of snow on the ground. So we'll see how long that takes to thaw out and melt. Again, we've got a question and answer box here. So if you have questions and answers, we'll give you answers, but if you have questions, please feel free to go in there and ask along the way. And Missy, why don't you kick us off? You're going to talk a little bit about some of the soybean planting date plot work that you've been doing. Super interesting and timely for this season as we get ready to roll.
Yeah, I think, if there's something we've learned over the last 5 years is that, when it comes to planting, we need to probably push more on the soybean side and be more patient on the corn side. So I just want to, go through some of the data, some of the things we're looking at here, and really, how are we trying to change yields with pushing planting dates in soybeans? And of course, we couldn't do, this work without the support of our plot cooperators. So Case has been very supportive of providing tractors and planters to get a lot of this early soybean work out. So, and we'll of course continue that again this year. But, I want to remind people, let's think about what are the goals, say, well, I'm going to plant my beans early. Well, really, what are we after and what all happens out there? I think a lot of times people think, when we put the beans in the ground and if that ground's cold, well, they're not going to germinate. Well, reality, those beans are going to fire off right away, as far as they're going to take in their initial water, take their drink of water quite quickly. Now, once it takes that drink of water, how long it actually takes to get this bean on the ground, that's two different things there. But the initial drink's going to happen relatively quickly, 24, 36 hours after we put these beans in the ground. So we do think that first drink should be a little bit warmer soil temp, so it's warmer water. But after that, it's really temperature dependent on how long they take to get out of the ground, certainly. And in some of these early trials, we've seen it take as long as 30, 35 days to get these beans out of the ground. And with today's seed treatments, we can actually do that successfully. I'd say more of our issues have been if we plant early and then they actually come up too early, more your risk on the frost side after the beans are up. So the timing, of all this, certainly as far as once it's germinated, getting out of the ground is certainly temperature dependent, and kind of what we talk about trying to get to V1. So once we get to that first, trifoliate stage where we got one full trifoliate on there, the development of adding, nodes onto the bean plant is not really temperature dependent. The data out there would say that we're going to put a new node on the main stem about every 3.7 days until we get to that R5 growth stage here, where we're talking about these indeterminate beans that probably the majority of us are planting. So basically, it's kind of, if I get to V1, then I'm just going to start stacking nodes and it's going to be less temperature based. So it's kind of a race to how early we can get these beans, up out of the ground into this V1 growth stage. So some of the other things we do end up seeing is with the node development, a lot of times the nodes will be stacked closer together. I'll show some pictures of that in a minute. But with early planting, we do end up with more pods per node as well. But probably one of the biggest impacts that we've seen kind of from a yield component side of it is the ability to really branch these beans with the early planting. Then if I got branches that are holding pods, I can have an opportunity to significantly change my pod count number. Early flowering is another advantage. So if we say part of our goal is to try to flower around the summer solstice, so with early planting, are we able to do that, or maybe even ahead of that? We believe that when we have earlier flowering, that we're going to extend the R stages. So when we're in those reproductive stages, we've extended them, made them longer, which can be a good thing for yield potential as well. And then, of course, canopy closure. So the sooner we close these rows and we're not giving up sunlight, so in other words, our plant is absorbing the sunlight, we have opportunity for greater photosynthesis. And overall, of course, our goal would be to increase our total pods and then obviously yield in these fields. So here's an example of a picture from a plot from a couple years ago where we're looking at the amount of nodes that have been added here. And when we did all of our pod counts and node counts, we ended up with just shy of 2 more nodes that actually held pods per plant with the early planting compared to the late planting. The other thing we noticed is the nodes themselves, we held a lot more pods on these lower nodes versus the later planting. We have a tendency to abort more of those. And again, you can even see the branching a little bit in this picture as well. The other thing that we've seen along with this then is the shortened internode. So physiologically in the plant, it seems to, when we plant earlier, trigger that these internodes are shorter together. So at the end of the day, our plant might not be any taller, but it can actually still have more total nodes on it. And we have observed in these plots that when we have shorter internodes, we tend to have more pods per node as well. And you can see that in this picture here. I've got 4 basically pods on these nodes compared to 2 over here with the late planting. So there's some relationship there, probably physiologically in the plant, partially helping trigger more uniform flowering there to hold more pods per node. Here's an example of one of our plots from here at our office last year, where we come out and we planted April 21st, we had May 10th, and then May 24th. So this is just a snapshot in time now on July 14th. But you can really see a lot more kind of stacked nodes down here, internodes, and more branching on our early planting compared to the mid or the late, certainly. And as this goes on, this is the end of the season here, and you can see the amount of pods we were able to hold on these branches with that early planting. And the mid actually has some pods on the branches too, but it's just a higher quantity the earlier we plant. And as I mentioned, a lot of times maybe the plant might not be any taller with the early planting. It's just that the nodes are stacked closer together. As you can see with this late planting, we really extend out the length of these internodes, but we're relying more on the main stem for the majority of our yield at that point. So what's that kind of mean? Well, when we do counts on all of these plants, an example of the amount of pods actually held onto the branches. So with my early planting date, I had over 40 pods on the branches themselves. So this is just on the branches, not the main stem. When I looked at my May 10th date, I'm around 24 pods on those branches. And with the late planting, I only have 8. So a big difference on the ability not only to branch, but to hold pods on those branches. Here's an example of just what's a particular plant look like. So this is just a plant out of that early planting. The total pods on this plant was 71 pods. But when I start to map out, and I like to do this on beans, we get an understanding of where our yield comes from. This is looking at the number of pods per node that we have on there. But when we have the ability down here on the bottom, we actually branched the unifoliate in node number 1 and node number 2. So all of those lower nodes had pods that stayed on them. In fact, we ended up with 39 pods on here from branches. So a huge percentage of our total yield is actually coming from the branches. In a big comparison, this is on the late planted, so the May 24th, I have 47 total pods and only 3 are coming from the branches. So now I'm really relying on my main stem, and my main stem had some nodes, with 4 pods on a node and even 5 in this case, but we really can't make up for the lack of pods that we can end up having on branches with that early planting. So that's one thing we've really learned about the early planting. Where's part of this yield coming from? It is coming from more pods per plant, which is going to give me more seeds per plant with that early. Part of it in the total amount of nodes, on the main stem, but then also really the branching as being the big dominant part. So this is just an example of that plot, some yields from it. Now, these are just small plots, so these are where we hand harvest and run them through our bundle thresher. But you're looking at a yield gain here on April 21st compared to May 10th of 6.7 bushels. So holding on to more of those pods on those branches, we've added a huge amount of yield when it comes to beans. I'm in here at the May 10th, just shy of 77 bushels per acre, 10 bushels more than what I did at May 24th. So there's definitely opportunity as we look at pushing these planting dates and the ability of what we're able to do. Now, one thing we have also looked at is, as we push things and get early, or even maybe what I call ultra early. So for Michigan, it'd be pushed into this, more that first part of April. Some of the things that we found to be extremely important really go back to planter performance. So we get uniform planting depth. We're targeting around 1.5 inches, maybe 1 3/4 inches if we need a more stable microenvironment. The down pressure on the planter, we're believing, becomes a lot more important. The opportunity to run row cleaners with early planting could be more important. So we're just starting some trials with Martin Till, looking at their 45-degree angle row cleaner, where traditionally on our corn planters, we would be a 60-degree angle. So these allow us to run these on 15-inch rows with planters and actually be able to flow the residue here. And then we're also looking at meter performance as part of that as well. I do want to show some examples of that because this is something I think is going to be a big deal as we go forward. So when I look at the idea, and this happens to be on a precision planting VSET meter, but they have a plate in here that has a single hole, so it's 56 cells compared to the traditional double hole, an 80 cell, where I'm dropping 2 beans down the tube all the time instead of a single bean. Now, we can't get crazy high populations with this, but majority of us are low populations now anyways, so we can get that achieved here. But this is what it looks like in the field. I mean, these plants for soybeans are spaced pretty uniformly, about every 4.5 inches apart for this particular population we're planting at, with that single hole plate in there, compared to here, the double. This is a lot of times what we see with that double. We've got 2 plants close together, then we got our gap, then we got 2 close together again, and then our gap. So just a lot more variability in the spacing itself. So in this year's plots that we've seen, again, these are our small plots where we're hand harvesting for uniformity with our bundle thresher, but we're seeing some big yield increases here. If we look at the blue bars, are 90,000 population, but I gained over 7 bushels, 7.2 bushels compared to the 80 or the double hole plate. And then in here at the higher population, a little less of a response here, just about 6.5 bushels. So spacing was an issue of both populations, but certainly bigger at the low populations. And this is something we've seen in a lot of our planter plots, is the lower populations we plant, the more important uniformity uniformity is, whether it's uniformity of emergence or uniformity of spacing itself. So this is a same trial from 21, where in 2021, we didn't really see a difference at the 140,000 population, but we did again at the low population. So it appears in this case, spacing may be a little bigger at the lower population. So we'll repeat those trials for a third year this year and see where we shake out. But certainly there looks like there's some advantages in beans where we're running, in this case, 15-inch planters of actually trying to singulate this seed. The other thing that we have learned over the years, I wanted to share this briefly, is basically reducing emergence variability. So the earlier we plant, the more important we believe it is to have every plant that is out there be what I call a rock star. And as we get delayed emergence in beans, in the past, everybody said, well, it doesn't matter because, beans, they can compensate. Well, I think that was true when we were planting higher populations. But today, with these low populations, we think every plant does need to be a good one and a rock star. And it really does matter if they're coming up late or aren't spaced properly. So here's just a photo example of that. This is what we call a plant coming up on day 0. So when we first see the beans necking out of the ground, we're marking them with our popsicles. Then we're coming back one day later, and any new ones that are coming up, we're marking, and then we're coming back another day later. But you can see as we go from basically what I'm calling day 0 to day 1, you see a little bit of a change there in yield. But once I get to 2-day delay in emergence, it's really affecting the amount of pods on this plant. And we kind of start grouping them kind of 3 to 5 day delays and 6-day and on down. But these late emergers have poor branching and poor pod numbers. So here's an example of what this looks like when we're doing these field trials. Here's one that came up on day 0. I'm marking that. Here's one that come up on day 2. But you can already see this unifoliate here is already a bigger, getting ready to start to open, where this one's still tight. So we're definitely behind. We did these trials for 3 years, evaluating this emergence uniformity. We did it at 2 populations. So we have 140,000 population, the red bars here. And the data really said that, well, if I compare to emergent on what I call day 0, so the first day that they come up, 1-day delay, I'm at 96% of yield, so I'm doing pretty good. At a 2-day delay, I'm at 88% of yield, and then I really start to tail off here. I'm at 79% of yield by 3 days. A 4 to 6 day delay, I'm out here at 67% of yield. But what we learned in these plots is when we lowered population, it's now even a bigger deal. So now even a 1-day delay, I'm already at 90% of yield compared to my day 0s. That's probably all I want to give up there. So anything that's at a 2-day delay coming up, I'm only at 75% of yield. Those plants are just going to be behind and stay behind. And you can see it trend on down there. So our data really says that delayed emergence is a bigger issue in lower populations. Here's a picture example of that from this past year's plots, where we can see on day 0, the plant had 79 pods, a 1-day delay had 73 pods, but by a 2-day delay, I'm only at 54 pods on the plant. This is at 100,000 population. Now at 140,000 population, again, the drop-off isn't as fast. So we believe this uniformity and how important it is to get the microenvironment good in corn is actually becoming more important in soybeans as well, and that this planting pass we maybe need to start looking at a whole lot differently. And maybe there are reasons to look at things like row cleaners or hydraulic downforce or seed singulation to really try to get that uniformity out there. Another thing that we've looked at with the early planting beans is the importance of a little bit of tillage. So far, we haven't had anything that says it's got to be full kind of with tillage, but just going in there with a vertical till machine. For example, here we're going in here with a Terramax from Great Plains, just something to warm those soils up, manage the residue a little bit. And what it's allowing to do is get those beans to a little bit quicker of a start. So here's an example from our demo plot from last year, April 30 planting that was tilled compared to April 30 no-till. And you can see a big difference on the snapshot in time of the length of those radicals already. And certainly what happened in that plot then with that kind of a start is that the tilled came up earlier. So this is a percent of target emergence. So the red line here is where we hit it with the Terramax tool prior to planting. And then the blue line is the no-till. So you can see that we did, with the vertical till, have earlier emergence, as well as our total emergence. We actually were closer to our percent target where we did that little bit of tillage. But there's a lot of residue to fight out there. You take all that residue plus cold conditions, and it just seems like it's a little tougher to get the uniformity of those beans emerging out there. Here's an example what this looked like. We know that we also affect early growth when we till these. So if I take a look here on the April 30th planting, this is where I hit it with a vertical till Terramax, and here's where I just had no till. So there's a big difference in that early growth of the plants as well. We see it also in the regular planting dates. We've had good data in the past, 2.5 type bushel range of vertical tilling ahead of beans. We think the number is going to be bigger in the early planting. And those are some trials we're going to push into field trials this coming spring here, if the weather allows. So what are we seeing with some of this earlier planting date? Here's an example of a plot from last year, a field trial. Where we are out here on April 22nd compared to May 12th. And we're at 72 bushel beans, about 4.8 bushels better with that early planting compared to the normal. So definitely some big bumps when you think about, I call these free bushels, right? It doesn't cost me to be out here anymore at this time as it cost me to be out here at this time. So these are bushels I want to try to take advantage of. Now, we've also done some stuff where we're even pushing it earlier. So remember, I'm here in Michigan. So where we're looking at, in this case, it was April 6th. Here was April 11th. Some of these really early dates get a little trickier. And in some cases, we really haven't seen a huge response in yield. We've got on average, and this was from 2020, just shy of 1.7 bushels. I mean, I'll still take that without any question. But we've also have had some go backwards, or that they came up too early and gotten frosted. So there's a lot more risk associated with pushing them too early where I'm at here in Michigan. Our best bet is that we get them in the ground and they don't come up too fast, so to speak. But in 2021, we definitely had some come up too fast where we did frost some of those. So there's still a little bit of a game you got to kind of play there. But part of the overall goal of what we're trying to do with pushing the dates, one is to capture some yield on those individual fields. But the other part of it is to think about your whole farm management. When you think about your whole farm management, how many beans do get planted what I call too late on your farm. So we're at here in Michigan, if we're planting after May 15th, we know we're giving up another 5 bushels or so, 4.5 on average. So maybe my goal is try to have all my beans planted maybe by May 5th or May 7th. Well, if I don't get started early, is that really possible? So sometimes we got to look at, trying to get our overall farm averages up too and have less late planted beans on your farm. Here's an example of just what we were getting on just kind of moving away from that post May 15th. So we used to always, in this part of Michigan, southern Michigan, we'd plant all of our corn and then we would start our beans. And so we started doing this trial work back in 2017. And what we were finding is if we moved that up and we planted the beans late April or the very first few days of May, we were gaining about 4.5 bushels compared to that post May 15th. So there's definitely been a switch here to push these to earlier. Again, potential free bushels here, 4.5, 4.6 bushels. You look at the potential return on investment there in today's economics, you're talking 60, 65 bucks an acre. Again, a little bit of what I call those free bushels, free economics, because it's going to cost me to plant that crop, whether I do a little earlier or a little later. So we really encourage people to try to push these planting dates a little bit earlier to help increase yields. Beans are a lot less sensitive to emergence problems with today's seed treatments. I think that's a big key. We're not doing this on beans that aren't treated with high quality seed treatments, but this doesn't happen on its own. It really takes a plan. It's a logistics thing. How can you logistically be set up to plant beans earlier on your farm? So we believe that it also allows kind of for managing population. So I can get that plant going quicker. It's going to branch more as well. That tied to population. So I manage that back with my variable rate planting and it becomes a win-win really quickly. We believe vertical tillage is going to be part of this and helping increase yields. And then of course, I already mentioned kind of seed treatments have to be part of this as well. So and just as I wrap this up and we get ready to switch, Canada, just a big thanks to our plot partners. Again, we couldn't do this plot work without the support of Case and having access to planner and different technologies on that planner. We work with Precision Planning and Martintil on their row cleaners. Ken and I have working with Yetter on either planter components or tillage equipment as well. New Holland's been a huge supporter over the years in supplying just tractors that we can do tillage with and run our grain cart with. Of course, all of our plots are weighed with a grain cart with scales, so Unifirth helps support that. McFarland and Great Plains have been big supporters on the tillage side as well. And then here in Michigan, we work with this Michigan Soybean Committee. They help provide some funding so we can collect some of this detailed data I was showing you. It costs a lot of money to collect pod or count pods and nodes and do all that analysis, takes a lot of labor. And so part of what we do with them is they support some of that so we can collect better data and really understand what's happening from a yield component perspective. So I'm going to switch over. Well,
Yep.
Go ahead, Clint. You got some questions coming
Yeah,
in?
I was going to ask you one question real quick while Ken jumps in to run the PowerPoint for us. One of the questions that came in was, what happens when you plant early and it freezes? How does that overall impact either the plant or the pods as it grows through it?
So what we noticed with the frost freeze damage, when the beans first emerge, they're actually quite hardy. So in 21 is when we had our what I call the frost and more frost year. So our initial one, we had some beans up and the frost was around the 21st of April. And we had temperatures as low as 23 degrees for our low temps. And we had kind of 2 cold nights. But we had beans survive 23-degree temperatures, but where they had just emerged, the growing points at that point were very well protected by the cotyledons, and those cotyledons are pretty hardy. So even if you did burn off your main growing tip, which we did in some of the plants, we had 2 more growing points that were protected by the cotyledons. So when they're small, we found them to be very hardy. Where we've run into more trouble is when we get the real later frost. So now my beans are up in their first trifoliate. So I got my first trifoliate out, or maybe my unifoliate's all the way out, and I get frost. Those are a lot less hardy. So I've killed beans with 29, 30-degree temperatures that were bigger versus 23 degrees, 25 degrees when they were much smaller. So it is a little tricky there. I mean, we certainly, in our plots of, again, I'm in Michigan and plant some of these the first week of April if the conditions allowed. Our biggest concern is, do they come up too early? And we've been about, across all of our field trials, I would say our success rate's been about 80%, where we've been 80% successful with increasing yields or maintaining yields as we've gotten really into that, what I call ultra early situation.
Great stuff. We'll turn it over to Ken.
Okay, going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about tillage ahead of corn and some of our trials that we've been working with, and looking at the concept of what type of tillage growers are asking about and want to do. And a lot of the customers are in a vertical format out there running vertical tills, and what's the pros and cons of a vertical tillage situation versus a high-speed disc, which a lot of growers are using the high-speed disc as well. So in this case, this plot, we're using Great Plains Terramax, so we can actually run it in a vertical format, and we can run it as a high-speed disc by changing gang angle on the tool. Now, here we're running in a 0-degree situation, a lot of residue on top, typical vertical tillage in the spring. All we're doing is breaking the crust, sizing residue, leaving a lot of cover. And guys like this to warm the soil up, get things off to a quicker start, just like Missy showing in the soybeans as well, a little bit warmer soil, but still stay in that vertical format with it. But the problem, or some of the downside to the vertical tillage, of course, is running it straight. We don't fill in ruts or wheel tracks or gullies or anything like that's out there like a soil finisher would do. And we don't take out weeds. So if we run vertical tillage like this through some winter annuals or early weeds coming up in the spring, all we do is make them mad. We don't really take them out. So the question is, what about making this more of a surface tillage or horizontal tillage, moving it towards a high-speed disc? So that's what we're doing in this plot. We're running at a 0-degree angle. We move it on up to a 4-degree angle, and you can see that we're starting to get more coverage. We're getting more shearing that would take place out there. You're taking out more weeds, and then move it to a full 8-degree angle. Now we're back to where you would be in a horizontal format with a high-speed disc or a soil finisher. So from a planting standpoint, depending on your planter setup, this may be easier for you to plant into. It's going to be a warmer soil. You're going to have some weed removal, some leveling that would take place out here in that process, good incorporation of the residue. But then the full effect is, does it have a difference on yield at the end? So that's what we're looking at, because when you get past about a 3-degree angle, you can really notice the shear in the soil, and you are moving towards a horizontal format. So if we look at a 2020 plot that we had in this Birkbeck soil type, a light silt loam, at a 0-degree angle with the machine, that was our highest yield in this situation. And we kind of trend down as we move towards the 8-degree angle. Now, also in this farm, we have side hills and we have side hill seep where there's more moisture. And with the side hill seep, it's easier to put in not only a horizontal layer, to put in a slight compaction layer. And that shows up pretty strong in those zones with the side hill seep in 2020, that while we were getting more full width tillage, it was moving us towards that horizontal format that a high-speed disc would move to. In 2021, situation where we had more moisture to deal with in the spring, but as we look at going from a 0 to 2-degree, once we seem to pass the 3-degree mark, we start to pick up a drop off in yield, and we start to move more towards that horizontal format. At 8-degree, actually, in this case, we were below the soil finisher. So we added a soil finisher passes in between here. And at 8 degrees, we were yielding less than the soil finisher. And in this case, thing to remember is the horizontal layer, the shallower it is, usually the more it costs you in bushels. In this case, the soil finisher would be quite a bit deeper in its layer, where the high-speed disc is going to have a pretty shallow layer. And the shallower that layer, the more susceptible you are to those horizontal changes out there. As we move into 2022, and again, you can see out here, we're doing the different angles where we would have the side hill seeps and things like that that would show up in there. Kind of similar in 2022, we had a flash drought in June. But again, the 0-degree angle was our highest yielding. And we get down to the 8-degree angle. In this particular replication, it's closer to the soil finisher. And this one, again, with the side hill seep, is that shallow surface layer shows up in yield. And it backs us up again. So a scenario where, as we look at what we're trying to do now, question said, what if I run at 4-degree angle and run it twice? I think you're going to see very similar results that we are seeing here at that 8-degree angle. Now, again, these plots are standalone plots. They're one pass and plant. They're not something that was chisel plowed in the fall and leveled up. I think if it was chiseled in the fall and you were leveling it, we wouldn't see this response. But most of our high-speed disc are run in bean stubble as we're trying to warm up that soil to plant corn into. So over the years, saying that, again, above a 3-degree angle, you're moving more towards a horizontal pass at that scenario. Also, when we look at tillage, we looked at trying to take horizontal tillage with the soil finisher and see if we could relieve some of the issues with the horizontal layers that we're putting in there. In this case, working with McFarland on this project and looking at their talon points, where we would shear the soil off with the regular sweep and then run a, I guess, would you want to say kind of a strap through here to break that surface to try to get the horizontal layer cracked open. And when you're digging behind it, you can see where the talon point is running as far as it's running below that shovel, and putting a fracture through the till line. Now, one thing we noticed, digging underneath the talon point, you still have a horizontal format, meaning that it's not vertical tillage. It still breaks in a horizontal format when you put the shovel in there and pull back on that, just like the normal shovel would. These are running across the horizontal layer. We always talk about look below ground, the roots will tell you what's going on. They're doing it in the normal shovel, and they are running across the surface with the talon point. So it's not changing soil density. And as we dig below it, we realize that the moisture below this layer has a hard time coming up into the soil profile. And it isn't like the roots are all found going down through that talon point in there. They're pretty much on a horizontal plane, but you have broke your horizontal surface with it out there. Looking back in the first plot with this back in 2020, looking at no-till into bean stubble versus the regular shovel versus the talon point. A lot of noise in here, not a lot of separation. You would say probably the no-till is doing better than the tillage in this situation, and the talon point had very small advantage over just the regular shovel in 2020. The plot repeated in 2021. And as we use the same machine and knock the shovels off and put the new ones on, so we have the same tool running through the field, just changing the sweeps. You can see here again, as we're breaking through that horizontal plane with it. Now, 2021 is pretty unique for us here. Was the year of tar spot. So we had heavy tar spot pressure that we had to deal with across our customer base. And we were in an area that received 2 500-year rains 19 days apart. So that's what this plot saw. And in this scarring that we did down here, this actually cracks on that line, and that crack actually, if you want to think about it, put a crack in the bottom of our swimming pool. And with the 2 500-year rains 19 days apart, this was enough drainage to actually drain it. So the root system was on top, but you could see the water get away faster, and it produced a pretty outstanding plot as far as that talon point. Just replication after replication kind of walked away from this, and we're picking up almost a 20 bushel yield increase. These numbers scare me a little bit on the basis that it took 2 big rains back to back to make this happen, but it did show and tell us that we were releasing some of that water that wasn't caught standing on top of that horizontal layer. So a situation where we were able to move that water into the lower profile. So the 2021 data is probably as strong as you're going to see of that. In 2022, we actually have a flash drought in this area, and we hardly had no tar spot at all, in a situation where now the difference between these points is a lot closer. Again, here rep 1 has the side hill seep in it, and when the side hill seep shows up, you can see it in that point as well, but averaging across there, the talon point yield advantage to here. But I do believe it does have some possibility in certain soils to help us out, especially our silty clay loams and our clay loams, of maybe giving us a point there to move some of that water through the horizontal layers where we run into trouble. In the line of vertical tillage, we call strip till, of course, vertical tillage, because you're doing it in a vertical format. And one of the things we're looking at, one of the challenges we have in all of our strip till trials is maintaining the ear count, because you don't know what kind of fall that you're going to have. So a situation, we're out here with a Yetter strip till bar, and this isn't flowing like we want to, but time is running away from us. So if it doesn't overwinter well, a lot of our growers have now moved back to freshening that strip in the spring. So we come back out there and freshen it with some type of freshener, and there's all different designs out there to do that. A lot of our growers are now adding fertility to the freshening pass. So when they come back through and freshen their strips, they're freshening and putting on some nitrogen and sulfur at that point. So while these strips look like a lot easier place to plant into than underneath the residue come spring, one of our challenges with the strip is just that. That's not a really uniform spot to be planting into. Down in here, we're going to have moisture. This knob right here is going to be dried out in a matter of seconds. I run my planter through there and I put my seed in there, and this soil's not homogenized. And the seed will come up, but it doesn't always want to come up in it as uniform as we'd like it in corn. And that's where we run into trouble. Bringing the fresheners through in the spring, all we're doing is moving residue, flattening that surface, and bringing ourselves back to something that's more palatable to plant into as we run the fresheners. But we got to pay for all this in the end, as far as when we're working through it. So looking at this plot in 2022, we have no-till, we have spring freshing only, we have strip till only, and we have the 2 of them together, where we stripped in the fall, freshened in the spring. On this Catlin soil type, which is a tougher one for us to strip tilling, you can see that the 2-pass system kind of has the advantage across the board of getting that soil fit for planting. But if we look at an Ipavia soil type, this one's a little easier to work with. And strip till, in this case, strip till alone is doing the job for us, and adding that extra pass isn't as big an advantage. And I think it comes down to how well your fall strip over winters. And if you have a row freshener on hand to go out and fix what Mother Nature doesn't take care of for you in the wintertime, it's a big plus. If we move some of this nutrient off the planter and put it on the strip till, that also saves us some time and make the planting pass maybe a little bit smoother. And then you get that fall where you get no stripping done at all. the freshener is an option then to come back and do your spring freshening. And typically guys are running these anywhere from a week to 2 weeks ahead of planting to get that soil homogenized. So situation where the freshener concept is starting to see a lot of movement in that direction, depending on, again, what kind of soils and what kind of time frame the grower has to work with to get that ideal seed bed. We do an awful lot of cover crop trials, looking at cover crop ahead of soybeans and corn, and the situation ahead of soybeans, of course, it's quite a bit easier. Ahead of corn, it's our challenge, right? Because what are the mixes and how are we going to get them seeded and how are we going to get them put out there? We're struggling to get our aerial application working and the cost of high clearance applications out there. And a lot of cover crops are going to go in after planting and going in, after harvest. And after harvest, it kind of, again, brings us down to what can we plant behind a full season corn that's going to be viable and make difference out there? What's going to have enough growth to improve soil health and structure and that type of thing? And that's been a struggle for the last decade as we work through different cover crops. And a lot of growers like the cereal rye ahead of both corn and beans. And the main reason of that is we can plant it clear up into Thanksgiving. Of course, if it doesn't germinate, it'll germinate in the spring and we can get some growth out of that. That we can use to try to rebuild soils or structure or all the things that we want to do. Of course, our challenge in corn bean country is when we put cereal rye out ahead of a corn crop, you have the allopathic toxins that the cereal rye is going to bring to the picture. You have the carbon penalty that you're bringing to the picture. And of course, you, like any cover crop, you're going to bring some planting issues as well as things like cutworm, stuff like that. And how do we do this with a cover crop like cereal rye without giving up yield? And I'm going to be flat out with you, it's a challenge. But one of the things that we've been working with is to put the cover crop out, try to get it established, and then as late as you can to come back through and try to hit it in the fall with the strip till pass. And it's hard to see here in this picture, but there's actually cover crop growing out there, and we're trying to lay our strips into that field so we can come back and plant into that in the spring. Now, again, I'm realizing that depending whether you're in Minnesota or whether you're in Southern Illinois, what the differences would make. But then we were coming back, and in this case, we pre-killed the cereal rye again ahead of planting, trying to soften some of the blow. And we were able to plant into the strip till that we were doing in the fall. And that would be a zone that has less carbon penalty, less allopathic toxicity. Let's get in there and use that to plant into versus planting into rye that we killed, in this case, about 10 days before planting. And then looking at different kill dates. So killed just right ahead of planting like we are here, and killed earlier. So we got an early kill, which we don't get the growth out of the crop, but if we have less carbon penalty, we're going to have less allopathic toxicity in that same situation. So looking at timing of killing, if we're going to use the cereal rye, how can we use it and not give up too much yield? So looking at our 2020 plot, the blue bar is no-till, and this is no-till cereal rye with a late kill versus an early kill on this soil type. On the silt loam, we picked up bushels by killing it early. We picked up more bushels here by killing it early in this soil type. And you can see pretty much through this plot, we're picking up about 10 bushel by killing that rye early. The less growth we had on the rye, the less carbon issues, the less toxicity we have, of course, the less advantage you get out of the cover crop as you're taking it. But taking it small led to less hits in the yield. Then we add strip till into that picture. So in the case of the blue bar, that is strip till with a late kill. This is strip till with an early kill. And we stepped that yield up pretty good. This is strip till with no cover. So there's what we're trying to get back to as far as trying to move away from some of the downside penalty of that. But we've definitely improved it there. Definitely the strip till wins the day without the cover. But the earlier we killed it, even in the strip till, the better advantage that we had there. So we kind of summarize that back together. The no-till with late kill of the rye versus strip till late kill. The strip till advantage in here, if I'm killing that rye late, was pretty strong. We got no-till with the early kill. So my early kill and my late kill advantage there, but even there, if I strip it, I'm picking up that advantage. But we're still running 8 to 10 bushel, behind where we didn't put the cover crop. And we continue to work on that. We need other cover crops. We need other methods to be doing it. The cereal rye is one that most farmers keep circling back to. And that's going to have to come with some challenges when we're talking about a head of corn, a head of soybeans. It's quite a bit easier, but it's an area where it depends on whether you're putting a cover crop out just to put a cover crop out, or you want enough growth on that cover crop to make a difference in aggregate stability and infiltration out there. But strip till is probably going to be one of the vehicles we can use to close that gap some. Turn that back over to Missy.
Great stuff, Ken. Some of your partners that you work with, obviously we'll have a full list there, but you mentioned them along the way. Takes a lot of equipment, a lot of work to get some of those things done. So sure, want people to know we appreciate them jumping in to help us out with some of these test plots.
There's no way we could do it without them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Missy, let's talk a little bit about some of this starter fertilizer and some of the relay stuff that you all are doing.
And Ken and I are going to kind of do a little, both of us on this one. And I think it's a good follow-up from what you're talking about, with some of that carbon penalty and what we're trying to do coming out of the cover crops is we've really learned how important planter nutrition really is. And, I think way back when, Ken, and you're trying to teach me and train me, and you're talking about, starter response and, what I need to look for out in the field. And part of what we're looking at, is really trying to get that bigger, greener plant, and getting off to a better start with that. So visually, when you think about that starter response that you're going to see, the plant should be bigger. They should be greener. We should be getting more nutrients in them. So that's kind of, initially where we started with a lot of this starter stuff. And then we leaned in and started working on this whole idea, this relay system. And Ken's done a tremendous amount of work on this over the years. And we've kind of tagged in on some as well. And now as new technologies come out, we're looking at some of these other options for what we truly call a relay system. What do we mean by that? We're talking about having one starter band close to the seed roots and a second one a little bit further away. So a relay system is really having what I would call some sort of a 2x2 type placement. We kind of categorize things into that today because there's all different options of ways of getting some sort of nutrition in a band on the planter. But the point is that it's a little bit further away so you can put on some volume of actual nutrients. But then we look at trying to get something closer. So in years past, we've done a lot of work looking at more what I'd call a pop-up or an inferno type application. And now more recently, we've looked at what we call the FurrowJet application from Precision Planting. So we'll go through kind of some examples of that, and what we're seeing that in these plots. But again, when we talk about relay system, kind of define it here, we're talking about having one starter band that's going to be close to these seed roots. So these seed roots end up being vitally important for really getting this plant off to a good start. We're not going to switch over and live off these crown roots till we get, maybe about V5, V6 corn. So what that plant lives off initially is, of course, the nutrients in the seed itself, but then whatever these seed roots help supply. So if we can have one band of nutrition that these seed roots can actually pick up, we start to see some advantages there. But a lot of times what I can put on here for total nutrients is not enough, because if I put on what I need here total, it ends up being too hot and I end up with injury or salt burn from the amount of fertilizer I'm putting on there. So what we found is if we do this relay where I got a little bit here, then I got another band that is further away. Now this band that's further away is much safer. I have an opportunity to run a lot more volume of actually fertilizer here. So it's a relay system in that I can start off here and then I can transition over more nutrition to this next set of roots. So this is just an example of a relay system here on the right compared to without on the left, but can have some big advantages in that early growth. So traditionally in the past, in our relay work, we've done mainly through a Keaton seed firmer or a totally tubular coming down the front. And our data on that's been very good. So this is in addition to running a 2x2 type placement. We're running just shy of about 6 bushels for that type of placement. And for me and my lighter soils here in southern Michigan, we'd be looking at more 3-gallon rates of a low salt type pop-up fertilizer here, like a 618-6 or a 624-6, those types of products that are low salt and pretty safe. And again, about 3 gallons, and then I can get out to that next band. More recent, what we wanted to take a look at is some newer technology that's out from Precision Planting called the FurrowJet. And what this allows us to do is actually kind of split up what we're doing here. So out here on the sides of this, we call these the wings, but it actually allows me to place some fertilizer into the wings here. And what these wings are then actually going through the sidewall itself. So as these are slicing through the sidewall, I'm putting some fertilizer there. I think it gives us a lot of aspect of better safety. So I'm no longer putting it right on top of the seed, right directly in the furrow itself. It's off to the side a little bit. Then it also still allows me the center one to put something else on. So that's typically how we'll set up. So in these trials now, because I'm putting it off to the side through the sidewall here with a FurrowJet, I can actually run 1034-0, which for us was a big deal versus spending the money on the low salts. And a lot of our plot work around 4 gallon per acre is what we're running of that. So this is kind of the setup here. Again, it's by Precision Planting, but allows me to put the fertilizer in the wings. Again, I believe a little safer position than the way we set up our planters here. Again, since I am in those lighter soils, I try to save the center one then for true infertile things like insecticides, fungicides, biologicals, but then I'm running water here. Now, some other areas, heavier soils, maybe you still want to have a little bit of fertilizer there. This system has worked pretty well for us. But I always tell people when I start to talk about things for planting, I become your logistical nightmare, because now we're talking multiple pumps, multiple tanks on here. So when I set up my plot planters, you can see in this picture here, we work with Schaefer Manufacturing on some of our pumps, but really allowing me to run 3 full systems. So I got my 2x2 pumping system. I'm running off a hydraulic drive with Precision Planting. And now I've got 2 electric pumps on here, one to run in the wings and another to run in the furrow itself. So as you can see in the picture here, I've got lots of tanks, pumps on my planter to make all this work. So it is a commitment. You know, you start to say about adding all this, and then, well, now your tender wagon isn't big enough, and now you gotta make some changes through and through. But we've seen some big value and gains here. So here's an example of a plot. This is from pictures were from 2020. Where we're looking again, this planter's already got 2x2 type placement on it. Now I'm looking at adding this relay system where I'm coming in here with the 1034-0 through the wings of the FurrowJet, either at 0 gallons. So basically my check there, no relay, versus 2 gallons, 4 gallons, and 6 gallons. And we see this corn get that bigger, greener response and step right up. And one of the biggest gains I really think that we're getting from this relay type system is what we've traditionally seen just running starter versus not, is an advancement maturity. And this is a big deal, especially for us in more northern climates. We're trying to move things along. As you can see here with the 4 gallon of the relay system, so 4 gallon of 1034-0 in the FurrowJets compared to 0 here. All my silks are out here and got some length to them. I have not even emerged any silks here yet. In fact, the tassel's not even out. This particular plot, we advance maturity by about 7 days. So this is a big deal for some of us of pushing and advancing that maturity. But where does it start? It starts back at that early growth. This is a picture from last year's plots where you can see again in the relay system. So both of these has the 2x2 placement. It's just this doesn't have anything else with it here at the control. And on this other side here where we got the bigger, taller plants, we ran 4 gallon of 1034-0 with that FurrowJet. And we can see a big early season response. One of the other things we're looking at with this is, would we expect a bigger response based on what we know about the hybrids? So we've teamed up with AgriGold hybrids. We started this plot last year. We'll continue it again this year. But looking at what do I know about the hybrid? If it's one that flexes more in what we'd call girth, so the rows around, would I expect to see a bigger response? So this is where I'm really trying to dial in my economics. So we have 2 different hybrids here. And then on the right would be where it has 4 gallon of 1034 in with the FurrowJet. So you can see still a nice response compared to the check. Also on this one that flexes in girth. So early on, it was like, well, it looks like it's still working good with both of these systems. And as we take this to yield in, again, I want to just reiterate that all of our plots are weighed. So we're certainly calibrating yield monitors as well, but then every one of these field trials is getting weighed with a grain cart with scales on it. So it's a true, basically, calibration per pass that we can then analyze this data properly. We think that's highly, highly important with all the plot data that we work with. But in that plot where we weighed it out, there was a difference in the type of hybrid. So the one that flexed more in girth here actually had a 12.5 bushel gain from adding the 4 gallons with that furrow jet, or adding that relay system. Now the other one was still great too, 7 bushels. So I'm paying for it either way, but certainly the hybrid type looks like it was getting a bigger response if it did flex more in girth. So that might help with some decisions that we look at how we can manage these hybrids a little bit better. But we've done these trials over several years here now. We got 4 years worth of data, and you can see that we're averaging over 9 bushels per acre by adding, in this case, they're either 3 or 4 gallons of 1034O in with this furrow jet system, again, as a relay. So that all of these already have the 2x2 placement. When I run the economics on that, you can see that I'm $35, almost $36 an acre, return on investment, money back in my pocket from adding this relay system in here. So we've been pretty excited about what we've been able to see with this relay system. I'm going to switch it back over to Ken here. He's going to talk a little bit about what they've seen in their soils, a little bit heavier soils, on some of the advantages and looking at this relay type system as well.
Yeah, we're finding out a lot of different things about the starter and the relay, and part of it is the weather, of course, when you put the plot in, and the other is the hybrids are making a difference. But some of the same stuff that Missy's seeing here, we're using on Marco Quick Row LTE at 3 gallon in furrow. That's the orange, and then we're going to 9 gallon where we add 6 gallon in the wings with the 3 gallon in furrow, and we can see the response to the relay system in this plot in 2022, which you wouldn't think would be as much because we put corn in the ground this year and it came up in 5 days. So we've had a really good start. And if we look at the yield response, we picked up 6 bushel to this 9 gallon relay, but I needed 7.2 bushel to pay the bill. And in this case, I'm not quite paying the bill, but when we add starter fertilizer to the program, it shouldn't be additional phosphate. It should be part of your phosphate program, your 4Rs. So in this case, you could take 41 pounds of DAP out of your dry fertilizer, and then your break even on this plot would be 4.2 bushels. So not exciting, but at the same time, it's a response for this particular plot in a year when corn came out of the ground in Illinois in 5 days. This plot's a little bit heavier. We're doing a 15 gallon relay. So we're going 3 gallon in furrow, and the balance is then coming in the 2x2. And again, we're seeing a strong response in this particular plot in 2022. I had 15 bushel response. I need 13 bushel to pay the bill if I'm paying for the fertilizer and not taking it out of my program. But you really need to take 128 pounds of DAP out of your dry program. You only need 4 bushel to pay this bill when I square up my phosphate dollars. This was a nitrogen plot, but it gets interesting as we turn it into a phosphate plot. In this case, it's first year corn, and it only has 120 pounds of N on it, produced 257 bushel. That's a big number for 120 pounds of N. And this is because this plot has an IS&T value approaching 400. So the soil underneath this plot has a record of giving us some high N back to it. So that's pretty impressive. When we go from 120 pounds of N to 240 pounds of N, I only get a 3 bushel increase. We go to 350 pounds of N, I get a 13 bushel increase in that situation out there. Now, I need 36 bushel to pay this bill to go from 120 to 350, and I only got 13 bushel. I need 18 bushel here to pay the bill, and I didn't get it. But we took this same plot and we added 9 gallon of quick grow in a relay. And these are kind of crazy numbers. At 120 pounds of N, I bumped 22 bushel by adding starter to it. Now I'm at 268 bushel corn on 120 pounds of N. That's pretty crazy. At 240, I bumped it 6. At 350 pounds of N, adding starter on top of that added another 21 bushel. Now we think about this, that 9-gallon of quick grow added to there only cost me 4.2 bushel to get that 21 bushel return. If we think back on the nitrogen side, to go from 120 pounds of N to 240 pounds of N, I gained 11 bushel, but I needed 18 bushel to pay the bill. When I went to 350 pounds of N, I gained 25 bushel, but I needed 36 bushel to pay that bill. When I kicked the starter in, I gained 46 bushel, and I only needed 39 bushel to pay that bill. And in this case, it's crazy how this happens, but understanding the genetics, like what Missy was showing you, this is a G and a D hybrid. It flexes in girth and it flexes in depth. And by adding starter to it, we were able to add more kernels around, and you see the power of putting starter on what we call a girth flex hybrid. And by moving the maturity ahead with the starter, in this case, we also then change the fill part, the D on the end. So this hybrid's a big response. So you get a lot of numbers out of here. Most economical is probably still down in here when you have this type of soil, but we can push that soil to 300 bushel. Probably more with starter than we could with actual fertilizer in that situation. Along with a lot of starter trials that we do here, we also look at a lot of additives, and there's no way we could cover all the additives that we test or testing over the years. There's all kinds of additives you can throw in your starter mix. So you can throw in nutrients, add different nutrients to your additives, usually micronutrients that you can add to it. You can throw in biological stimulants, and you can throw in live biology. So there's all kinds of things that you can do through that planner. But one of two things that I want to make sure everybody understands is something that we've seen over the years. When it comes to additives, look at this plot in 2022. I'm using 1034O at 3 gallon through the furrow, in furrow, and I got really no response. But this plot has no zinc or no avail. And I'm going to start with the zinc. If I'm putting phosphate in the starter, my recommendation is make sure you have a zinc source. If you say, man, that zinc's too expensive, I'm going to tell you, pull your starter rate back till the zinc goes in. Because once we put zinc into the program, our response, the amount of times we have positive responses that pay the ticket goes way up. You need zinc as a coenzyme to move this phosphate into the plant. Another additive that we've got a lot of history with would be products like T5 or Avail. And if you hear them in NutriCharge, PMAX, there's different products in the same zone where you basically flood the zone with a lot of negative charges to keep your phosphate available. Make sure you have a zinc source in there as well. We go back to 2021 in our T5 plot. Remember, for us, 2021 is the tar spot year, so we got some pretty strong responses to our starters. But 1034O with zinc at 3 gallon, we picked up 8 bushel. That's at the high end for us from a response standpoint. We add the Avail to it, and we jack it to 16 bushel. And that's what we see is where products like Avail can make 3 gallon in furrow act like 6, maybe 7 gallon in performance, and they come to it without the risk of the salt burn in that scenario. So a situation, I only needed 3.7 to pay the bill there, 4.3 to pay the bill there. And this has been something that as we add the zinc and the Avail, and the original was just Avail, now it's T5, but seeing that from 2016 all the way forward, again, close to where Missy is in that 8 bushel range. And again, if you took your DAP out of that, right, you would be 1.4 bushel to pay that bill there.
And our results and looking at the Avail additive are very strong as well. So we've had it in the trials for the last 3 years. So in this case, it's looking at where I'm running it in the wings of the furrow jet with the 1034O. As Ken mentioned, we got zinc in our trials as well. But adding that in there, gaining anywhere in this case from 3.7 bushels up to 5 bushels, and we got a 3-year average of about 4.5 bushels. So return on our investment, adding the Avail T5 into the 1034.0 with the wings of the FurrowJet, over $20 an acre. So again, it's almost like, and you see in those pictures there, it's almost like starter versus none. When you look at the pictures, it's that powerful. So pretty impressive when you see what we can actually do with that. And again, if we flip there, Ken, just another big thanks. We couldn't do this type of plot work without all of our test plot partners. So we recently had basically took an old planner and stripped it down and basically rebuilt it. And we worked with 6-7 different companies looking at different components and adding to that, which is really allowing us to do a lot more of these starter and additive plots now. And we're going to be looking at more biologicals as products continue to come out. But it's pretty powerful to be able to do these plots and have them replicated and randomized like the university would, but have field size trials. So a huge shout out to all of our test plot cooperators from that side of it. And then if you click there, Ken, as you get ready, I just want to kind of end with one thing, and that's, it's time to get your planner ready to head out to the field. Hopefully you've got things pretty well, but if you got a little more work to do on it, we really encourage you to take a look at our video series. So this is just an online planner clinic. Always get requests, when are you going to do a planner clinic? Where are you going to be close? So we decided just to put one online that you can access at any time. You can be in your shop working on your planner. Let's say you're working on your gauge wheels, you can pull up just that section and see what we talk about on how to get your gauge wheels set properly. So there's a special code for everybody on the webinar today or that's going to watch the recording to get a discount off that as well. And then I know, Ken, you've got some information on the upcoming Corn and Soybean College.
Yeah, the save the date, July 25th, 26th here at Hayworth will be our Corn Soybean College that we do with Farm Journal. Missy and Bill come out and help us, and this is 2 days where we spend classroom time learning different things, and then we actually go to the field and implement kind of what we're learning. So it's a learning and teaching event. Hopefully it's it's a all-weather event, so if we have anything that stops us, such as rain, we just bring what's outside inside. But again, if you're making plans for things to do this July, we got a lot going on here on the 25th and 26th.
Well, it's a great event. I know we've all been there for many, many years, and always you never go and don't learn something. And it's the plot work that you're doing is the learning that you're doing every season that makes that event so great, because as we all know, there's always something new coming out, and we got to try to figure out how it fits in our operation within our systems, and try to understand exactly what it's doing to the plant, and to the soil, and to everything that we're trying to accomplish each and every year. So I know Missy, great planner clinic. Ken, great event out there at the Corn and Soybean College. We've got a couple seconds here. If anybody has one more question they'd like to ask, we'll give it just a minute here, but for the most part, this has been super, super informative. And while we're waiting to see if anyone has one last question, Ken and Missy, I'll ask you both one more question. What are you most excited to investigate in 2023? And Missy, we'll let you go first this time.
Oh, I don't know that I could say just one thing, Clinton. That's kind of like setting me up for I just can't answer it that way. But no, we've got a lot of good plot work coming out. We're going to continue to look at some of these additives and biologicals. I think we're just getting on the tip of the iceberg there when it comes to, things we're going to be wanting to potentially put in furrow and maybe get the corn going a little different manner. But then I'm excited a little bit too about what we're trying to learn and really understand what's happening with the soybean plants. We got a lot more focus on, whatever we are testing, how it's affecting these yield components. And that's where I think our big potential advantages are coming from when we look at some of this planting date stuff, is we're starting to understand better, what it means to try to hold more pods in these branches. And so just to continue to look at some of those aspects to try to understand more what's happening in the bean field itself, I think that's going to be our power to understand these beans better and continue to push bean yields.
Yeah, absolutely. What about for you, Ken? What are you excited about this year?
Kind of like Missy, we're looking at a lot of different fronts and you have to kind of weed them down to some extent, but definitely a lot of noise in that area of biologicals. And our customers are putting the pressure on how many we can test for them and where is it at? Because there is some worry, concern, belief that they're going to be part of regulation going forward if we can use biologicals to do what commercial fertilizer is. So we're trying to separate the chaff from the seed there as far as what's really going to make a difference and how hard is it to make that difference. And probably in the other area that we seem to really be gaining on a yearly basis is understanding our hybrids. We're starting to figure out now how we can make them more efficient once we understand them and understand how they flex and that type of thing. So we're working with Whiffles and AgriGold and different companies and trying to figure out, once we know hybrid characteristics, how can we turn that into bucks, right? How can we manage it? So if there's certain things you are not willing to do, not willing to change in your management program, there's some hybrids you shouldn't plant. But if you're willing to manage the hybrid for its weakness, there may be a wider window out there to work with when it comes to genetics. And so we're doubling down on the effort to take a look at how hybrids respond to fungicide, insecticide. Timing of the 4 R's is crucial, whether it's phosphate or potash. So figuring out a way that we can lean out some of these hybrids for us if we do have to do this going forward with less nutrients.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good stuff. We have one question come in here from Clark, and I'll let you all decide who wants to answer this. Would you expect to see the same yield response from Avail in just a 2x2 application? You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can. We have seen similar yield advantages in the 2x2 placement. Where it gets a little bit trickier is just that the ROI gets a little tighter. So the yield advantages have been very similar, but the way the Avail product is, we're treating a volume of solution. So if we are running other things like ATS and maybe UAN in that 2x2 band, the total volume has to be treated with something. So you can either treat it with another additive, or you got to run more of the actual Avail T5 in there. So the yield response has been very good in a 2x2, and if that's the only placement you got, we would still recommend that. Just the economics be a little bit tighter there, but still good ROI.
And we would say the same when you get into the 2x2, we're treating that whole work. So the cost of the treatment's going to go up, and it kind of then starts to depend on soil types. And when you're planting in warmer soils, you may not be able to get the ROI that you're looking for. But a lot of times our 2x2s have ATS and 28 mixed in with it. So now the cost is going to go up considerably to get that done.
Very good. Appreciate it. Thank you. We're not seeing any more questions. So with that, I think we'll wrap up today's Farm Country Update. Sure appreciate everyone for jumping on and joining us. Had a great crowd, great presentations. Thank you to Ken and Missy for being here as well. And don't forget to go keep up with what's going on over at agweb.com. Sure appreciate you all attending. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Yep.